Hello and welcome everyone to this exclusive webinar hosted by Hydrogen Energy News Biz. I'm Arnes Biogradlia, your guide through the fascinating and slightly explosive world of hydrogen. Just joking. Today, we're diving into liquid hydrogen production and storage challenges in the hydrogen economy. And who better to lead us than Dr. S.A. Sherif, who has a PhD in making incredibly complex things sound like a common sense. Dr. Sherif, it's an honor to have you here. Tell us about yourself and why we should all hang onto your every word.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I started my career in heat transfer and fluid mechanics. And then in the 1980s, I joined the University of Miami. That was my second university position. I had the pleasure of meeting Professor Nejat Vezoroglu, who got me into hydrogen energy. And we got in on the first renewable hydrogen energy contract from the Department of Energy back in the 1980s. And it was just an incredible journey from that point on. In 1991, I joined the University of Florida, and I continued my interaction with Professor Vezoroglu. I got on the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy editorial board, and I was one of 3 associate editors. At that point, we were publishing 24 issues per year, and we went to 36 issues, to 48 issues, to 52 issues. We got into 64 issues and 80 issues and 100 issues. The journal continues to flourish, and I continue to be involved directly or indirectly in hydrogen energy. So this is where I stand today, and I'm very happy to be with you today.
Thank you very much. If you thought hydrogen was just for blasting rockets into space, spoiler alert, no spacesuits are required. It's just a lot of really clever science. Before we kick things off, here's a quick word from our sponsor. Join the World Hydrogen Energy Conference, WEC, to dive deep into the future of hydrogen energy and its endless applications. Don't miss the next big wave in clean energy. It will be hydrogen-tastic. All right, let's get to the good stuff. Dr. Sherif will now guide us through a liquid hydrogen production and storage labyrinth. Dr. Sherif will cover everything from the initial "can we even do this" feasibility studies to holy hydrogen breakthroughs. Over to you, Dr. Sherif.
Thank you very much. So today, I would like to talk to you about the potential of using hydrogen as a new energy system. We call it the hydrogen economy, where we essentially produce hydrogen from a primary energy source, such as solar energy, and then we use hydrogen as an energy carrier in both the transportation sector and in the industrial and commercial sectors, as well as the domestic sector as well. Of course, in the case of the transportation sector, one of the 2 possibilities that we can use hydrogen is either using a hydrogen internal combustion engine, or we can use it for powering fuel cells. In any case, hydrogen would be stored on vehicular machineries that would be either in liquid form or in compressed gaseous form. There is also the metal hydride storage form, which is a possibility, but the most likely scenario for the transportation sector would either be the compressed hydrogen or it's going to be in the liquid hydrogen storage mode. So what I would like to do today is walk you through some of the challenges and the opportunities that hydrogen presents in the hydrogen economy, but I'm going to focus primarily on the production of liquid hydrogen and the storage of liquid hydrogen. So with that introduction, the production of liquid hydrogen is really another name for hydrogen liquefaction. Hydrogen does not exist in nature in atomic form. It exists in as part of a number of compounds. The most known of them are water, where you have hydrogen and oxygen uniting to produce the water molecule. And the extraction of hydrogen from the water molecule is going to be the most promising uh, uh, source of hydrogen, since it does not produce any carbon footprint, and uh, the only footprint would be traces of nitrogen, nitrous oxides that are very small to worry too much about. But for uh, the products of combusting hydrogen, if you were to use it in an internal combustion engine, it would be water vapor. And if you use it as a fuel cell to operate a fuel cell, you essentially are going to produce water vapor as well. You unite hydrogen and oxygen and produce electricity and water. And the electricity, of course, will be used to drive the vehicle in this case. So let us move on to the outline of the presentation. I'm going to first focus on the production of liquid hydrogen, which is liquefaction. I'm going to talk to you about the different aspects of liquefaction, including some thermodynamic concepts that are important to know, namely the inversion temperature and the Joule-Thomson coefficient. These are the two most relevant thermodynamic concepts that pertain to liquefaction. I'm going to talk to you about some conventional hydrogen liquefiers and some non-conventional hydrogen liquefiers, such as magnetic liquefiers. And then we'll talk briefly about the so-called hybrid liquefiers, which are a combination of conventional and magnetic. Then we'll talk about some of the cost of producing hydrogen with a study that we did about doing essentially a complete study on what it would cost to produce 1 kilogram of liquid hydrogen. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Then I'm going to move on to liquid hydrogen storage. First, I will talk to you about the different modes of storage. I will give you some relevant pieces of information regarding the different modes as far as the density of storage. And then we will move into some basic concepts regarding the types of hydrogen that exist in nature. And then we will move into the challenges associated with storing hydrogen in liquid form. And we'll talk about ortho-para conversion. We'll talk about boil-off losses, heat leak, thermal stratification, self-pressurization, sloshing, and flashing. Then we will go into vehicular liquid hydrogen storage. And I'm going to actually present to you some of the results that of a study that was done at Argonne National Laboratory. In fact, very recent study that I would like to share the highlights of it here with you, because it does include not only the technical challenges, but it also include the costs associated with achieving the both vehicular storage and stationary storage. But they focus predominantly on vehicular storage in this case, and that's what we will talk about. So this is more of a case study that I would like to just give you the highlights for, and then I'll conclude with some remarks about where we stand and where we're heading. First of all, let us talk about the types of hydrogen. There are actually two types of hydrogen that exist in nature: the orthohydrogen version and the parahydrogen version. The orthohydrogen version is the less stable form of hydrogen. It's a higher energy level. And as we all know, when you have in nature, when you have a higher energy level, you are less stable. You are more stable at the lower energy level. So the parahydrogen is the more stable form. At normal temperature and pressure, the normal hydrogen, the so-called normal hydrogen, is in fact a mix of 75% orthohydrogen and 25% parahydrogen. Now, if you actually increase the temperature, the ratio remains at 3:1, 75% to 25%. But if you reduce the temperature, that ratio starts to shift in favor of parahydrogen. And in fact, you can see on the diagram on the left side, the top left side of this slide, you will see that as the temperature goes up, the percentage of parahydrogen goes down. Conversely, if you move on the horizontal axis from right to left in the direction of reducing the temperature, you see that the percentage of parahydrogen goes up, and it actually reaches 100% parahydrogen at 0 Kelvin. And as we all know, it is very difficult, borderline impossible, to actually reach 0 Kelvin. So the hope that we can have is to have a very high percentage of parahydrogen, perhaps in the 98, 99 percentile range at extremely low temperatures. But in order for us to do that, this is a very slow process, conversion of orthohydrogen to parahydrogen. It is a very, very slow process. And unfortunately, it's an exothermic reaction, which is associated with the release of heat. In other words, when you go from parahydrogen to orthohydrogen, you actually release heat. And if you have a tank of liquid hydrogen, normal hydrogen, that is 25% para and 75% ortho, over time, it will become more para, and it will be heat release associated with that process. And that heat is going to be used to vaporize the hydrogen, to boil off the hydrogen. And therefore, it would be very difficult to store normal hydrogen for extended periods of time in the form without doing the catalytic conversion that is needed in order to not have the ortho para at 3:1 ratio, because that is not a very stable form. If said differently, if you put a tank of liquid hydrogen in your car, normal hydrogen that is, after 3 or 4 days, you're not going to have a whole lot left of it in the car because of that conversion from ortho to para and the release of heat and the vaporization of hydrogen as a consequence. So now, if you look at the diagram on the top right corner of the page, you'll see that the so-called triple point. This is a pressure temperature diagram of hydrogen. And in this case, we focus on parahydrogen, which is the more stable form. And you'll see the so-called triple point. The triple point is where solid, liquid, and vapor exist at the same time. Now, there's something called the critical point. And the critical point is a point, it's a thermodynamic state where if the pressure is above the critical point, you will not be able to have either liquid or solid form for that substance. So at what they call supercritical pressures, you can only have gaseous hydrogen. And in fact, the hydrogen that we see, the gaseous hydrogen that we see, is in fact supercritical hydrogen. It's all in the supercritical state. To get to the normal boiling point, which is 20.3 Kelvin, that's 253 degrees Celsius below zero, is in fact where the hydrogen gas will convert into hydrogen liquid. Now here they use the word vapor, and I would like to take a second here to distinguish between the word vapor and the word gas. Sometimes people use gas and vapor interchangeably, but the reality is that gas is gas and vapor is vapor. Gas, the term gas technically should only be used when you are in a supercritical state. If you are in a subcritical state, meaning that the pressure is below the critical pressure, and the substance is in gaseous form, we should call it vapor and not call it gas. We only should call it gas if it exists in a supercritical state. And that's the major distinction between gaseous hydrogen and vapor hydrogen. The word vapor hydrogen is not a very common word to use. We use gaseous hydrogen because 99% of the time, hydrogen is just simply comfortable being in the gaseous state. That is the most comfortable state for hydrogen to exist. In order for hydrogen to exist in any other state, you're going to have to exert an incredible amount of energy, or consume an incredible amount of energy. For example, liquefy it, or if you want to go into the solid phase, or if you want to go into the slush phase, which is somewhere between the solid and the liquid. And the slush phase is at 13.8 Kelvin. 13.8 Kelvin is going to be where you are you getting basically the hydrogen converting from liquid to slush. Now, if you go down at the bottom of this slide, you will see that the distinction between the orthohydrogen and the parahydrogen is in several features. One of them is the spin direction. You can see where the nuclear spin is in the opposite direction for the parahydrogen. If you look at the top right, the top left part of the slide, and compare it to the orthohydrogen, where the spin is in the same direction. The spin alignment also is parallel, so-called parallel in ortho and anti-parallel in para. And the energy state, of course, is higher in ortho. That's the higher energy state and the less stable form. And then the nuclear magnetic resonance, the spectroscopy, is triplet for the orthohydrogen and singlet for the parahydrogen. This information came from the Institute of Slush Hydrogen. They have them on their website. Now let's talk about the Joule-Thomson coefficient. And the Joule-Thomson coefficient is thermodynamically defined as the ratio between the temperature decrease and the pressure decrease, meaning the temperature gradient to the pressure gradient. In other words, partial T, partial P, and you have to do that at constant enthalpy in order for you to get the exact definition of the Joule-Thomson coefficient. Now, the Joule-Thomson coefficient should, in general, be a positive number, because as the temperature goes down, the pressure goes down, and as the pressure goes down, the temperature goes down, the pressure goes up, the temperature goes up, and so on and so forth. So they always go hand in hand. But if you have a negative Joule-Thomson coefficient, in some cases, you may have a negative Joule-Thomson coefficient, and that means that expanding, meaning reducing the pressure, if you expand hydrogen, put it in a bigger container, for example, at lower pressure, you would expect that the temperature will go down, and in other words, that there will be a cooling process associated with it. In some cases, you may actually have a rise in temperature when that happens, and that is where we call it the inversion temperature. The inversion temperature is where the Joule-Thomson, if you have a Joule-Thomson process, which is an isenthalpic expansion process in a Joule-Thomson valve, an isenthalpic expansion process is typically the case when you have flow going through a valve, ignoring the kinetic and potential energy associated with that, from the entrance of the valve to the exit of the valve. You will find that, in fact, the enthalpy remains constant across the valve. This is what we call a Joule-Thomson process, or a Joule-Thomson valve in this case. The inversion temperature for hydrogen is about 200 Kelvin. What that means is that the temperature of hydrogen gas at ambient temperature will not fall, in other words, will not decrease during a Joule-Thomson expansion, which is unlike other gases where the actual temperature rise when that happens. In other words, that for many gases, that is that when the pressure goes down, the temperature goes down. In this case, if you hit the inversion temperature, then you're going to have a rise in temperature. That rise in temperature is very serious, because it will, in fact, could cause occasionally some heating, although it will not cause ignition or fire or anything. Some people think that might cause ignition, but if you drop the pressure from of about 10 megapascal, which is huge. The atmospheric pressure is 100 kilopascal. That's 0.1 megapascal. If you drop the pressure by 10 megapascal, you only have a rise in temperature of about 3 degrees. In this case, 3 degree Kelvin or 3 degrees Celsius. It's the same thing. Now, the inversion temperature and the Joule-Thomson coefficient are best represented, in this case, for air. We took air as an example. And you will see that, in fact, the inversion temperature has a maximum value and has a minimum value. The inversion temperature for air has a maximum value of about 850 degrees Kelvin. and the minimum temperature of about 100 Kelvin. Now, so you can see the lower inversion curve and the higher inversion curve. And essentially, what I'm saying is that in order for you to reach a minimum or a zero or a minimum or maximum inversion temperature, the pressure has to be zero. You can see where the pressure is zero on the horizontal axis. In fact, both the lower inversion curve and the higher inversion curve hit the vertical axis, which means that the pressure is zero. And you will see that the values associated with those two points, in fact, would be the lower or the minimum and maximum inversion temperature for air. Now, if you apply this on hydrogen, and I don't want you to clutter your mind too much with this page, it's essentially showing the definition of the inversion temperature, which is equal to the specific volume multiplied by the partial T partial V at constant P, meaning that the temperature gradient relative to the volume gradient, if you change the volume a little bit, the corresponding change in temperature at constant pressure. If you take the corresponding change in temperature for a smaller change in volume at constant pressure and multiply it by the specific volume, you're going to get the so-called inversion temperature. Now, if you scroll down, if you use what they call a van der Waals equation of state, we call it a van der Waals gas, which it's a gas, it's a real gas that follows the equation of state of van der Waals. You will find that by derivation, you will get to the following conclusion, that the ratio between the maximum inversion temperature to the critical temperature is about 6.75 for a van der Waals gas, and the ratio between the minimum inversion temperature to the critical temperature is about 0.75 for a van der Waals gas. Now, hydrogen can be viewed as a van der Waals gas under certain conditions, when the pressure is relatively high and the pressure is relatively low and the temperature is relatively high. In other words, when it's behaving like more or less not an ideal gas, but something a little bit less than an ideal gas. So this is basically the take-home message for these two slides. Now I'm going to go to the next topic, which is the production of liquid hydrogen. In this case, would be the liquefaction of hydrogen. And I have only selected 3 cycles for you. There are many other cycles involved in the liquefaction, and this is going to be under the heading of conventional liquefiers or conventional liquefaction cycles or system. In this case, the simple Claude cycle is a very common one. And in the simple Claude cycle, basically what you have, the feed gas is fed into the compressor, and then you have heat exchangers. The hydrogen is compressed and chilled and expanded through a Joule-Thomson valve. Okay, and you see the Joule-Thomson valve on the right hand side here, the JT valve. And then a part of that compressed hydrogen gas is expanded in the expansion turbine. You can see the expansion turbine in the middle of the page here, and then it goes back into the feed gas line. Asadria et al. In 2018, they did a study on this and computed the coefficient of performance of about 0.055 and a specific energy consumption of about 22.1 kilowatt hour per kilogram of liquid hydrogen or liquefied hydrogen. If you go to the Brayton liquefaction cycle, the Brayton liquefaction cycle uses helium sometimes, or most of the time it actually uses helium mixed with neon. And it uses those two as an external refrigerant. And the cycle has a compressor that basically compresses the gas from 3 bars to 17 bars. That's about 3 atmosphere to 17 atmosphere. It has 2 parallel turbines that are expanding the helium gas. They bring them back to 3 bars, from 17 bars to 3 bars. And they have an ambient refrigerant heat exchanger that cools the compressed helium. And then there is a cold box where the hydrogen is first pre-cooled by nitrogen. There's a bath of nitrogen, and then liquefied by helium after being expanded to 3 bars. And again, if any of you that studied thermodynamics would know that in order to operate on a cycle, you're going to have to basically, what you do with your right hand, you have to undo with your left hand. If you raise the pressure, you have to lower the pressure, and if you heat, you have to cool. So in this case, the compressor and the expander, or the turbine in this case, operate as antidotes. Where the compressor raises the pressure and the turbine lowers the pressure. And of course, the heat exchangers, one of them is going to be a heating device, and the other one is going to be a cooling device. If you go to the so-called pre-cooled Linde-Hampson cycle, which is the Linde-Hampson cycle was one of the very earlier cycles of liquefaction, very, very common, very popular. The pre-cooled version of the Linde-Hampson cycle is, I selected that for you because I wanted to make a point about pre-cooling. Now, if you realize that the maximum inversion temperature of hydrogen is about 200 Kelvin, that is below ambient temperature, below ambient conditions by leaps and bounds. Therefore, what happens here is that you will find that pre-cooling is going to be an inevitable necessity in order to modify or to apply it on the so-called basic simple Linde-Hampson cycle, or you could do it for the basic Claude cycle or for the basic Brayton cycle. Any of these basic cycles, in order for you to make it effective, you're going to have to do some pre-cooling, and that pre-cooling is in fact going to result in improved coefficient of performance for that cycle. The pre-cooling here is done by a liquid nitrogen bath, whose boiling temperature is about 77 Kelvin for the liquid nitrogen. In other words, liquid nitrogen will vaporize or will become gas at 77 Kelvin and 1 atmosphere. Now, this is the pre-cooled Claude, and you will see in the pre-cooled Claude that you essentially you need to reach 20.3 Kelvin in order to get to the liquid hydrogen temperature, which is 253 degrees below 0 Celsius. That is achieved by two things. It's achieved by a combination of two things: the actual cooling that you are doing, and the so-called adiabatic expansion of the gas. Adiabatic expansion of the gas is a process that results in a cooling where the temperature drops. And of course, adiabatic means there is no heat transfer involved in this. And then after you do that, you do the expansion using two turbines, one hot turbine and one cold turbine, and follow that by a Joule-Thomson valve. And that Joule-Thomson valve, of course, is going to do an isenthalpic expansion process, and you will end up having a cooling process here as a consequence. Now, switching from the conventional liquefiers into the non-conventional liquefiers, and the most famous non-conventional liquefier is the so-called magnetic liquefier. Now, there are many other ways to do cooling, such as there's thermoacoustic cooling. There are many other ways to do it, but the magnetic refrigeration or the magnetic liquefaction has emerged in the 1980s and 90s, and there were a number of leading researchers in that field. The most notable one would be Dr. John Barclay, who used to work for a company in Wisconsin, along with Dr. Carl Zim and Dr. Tony De Gregoria. That group, and they were working very hard on magnetic liquefaction of hydrogen. Dr. Barclay later on moved to University of British Columbia in Victoria, and then later on moved to industry. And he has published many papers, and he has actually been involved in the production of one of the magnetic liquefiers, hydrogen magnetic liquefiers, on a commercial scale. There was a 0.1 ton per day active magnetic regenerative hydrogen liquefier in Astronautics Corporation of America in Madison, Wisconsin, and through the Energy Technology Center there within that company, they actually built this active magnetic regenerative hydrogen liquefier that was able to produce 0.1 ton of liquefied hydrogen per day. There was other work. There were other works in like in Ames Laboratory and others, and then GE got involved in this, and so there is a good effort. And now they're trying to do what they call room temperature magnetic refrigeration, not liquefaction, but magnetic refrigeration. And the idea with magnetic liquefaction or refrigeration is that there is a class of materials such as the paramagnetic salts or the ferromagnetic fluids that actually the temperature rises when you apply a magnetic field, and the temperature drops when you apply the magnetic field. In other words, when you remove the magnetic field, the temperature of these materials drops, and if you apply the magnetic field, the temperature rises. And if you actually can do this in a cyclical manner, you can actually do incremental decreases in temperature as a result of this, the so-called magnetization and demagnetization cycle. You apply the magnetic field, that's a magnetization stroke, so to speak, where the temperature goes up, and then you de-apply the magnetic field, and the temperature drops as a consequence. And because of the hysteresis effect, you will find that, in fact, there will be an overall decrease in temperature as a consequence. In other words, this is not a zero-sum game. This is a process that would result in an overall decrease in temperature. Now, moving on to the next topic, which is the economics of hydrogen liquefaction. Now, this is actually work that we did many years ago, where we examined how much does it take to produce 1 kilogram of liquefied hydrogen. Now, we did a study where we incorporated a lot of factors, and I'm going to get into those in just a minute here. But before I do that, I want to show you that we examined three different scenarios. One is a so-called conceptual liquefier, which is essentially a small-scale hydrogen liquefier, and then contrasted that with a very large, optimized design scale hydrogen liquefier. And then in between, we had an intermediate hydrogen liquefier that is sort of between the smaller size and the larger size. And in order for us to kind of get a feel of where we stand if we have a large scale liquefaction process versus a small scale liquefaction process. The economics of hydrogen liquefaction have been represented by several graphs here. I will just simply go over those very quickly. We looked at the operation and maintenance cost. We looked at the capital investment, or the so-called fixed charges on capital investment, and we compared those as a function of how much we are producing. We went all the way from 100 kilogram per hour of liquefied hydrogen to 29,700 kilogram per hour of liquefied hydrogen. And you can see that as we increase the production rate, in fact, the cost goes down per kilogram of liquefied hydrogen. So not surprisingly, the cost goes down as you increase the production rate. Now, if you look at the three categories of costs, the power cost, the cost of power, the cost of operation and maintenance, and the fixed charges, you will see that the power cost, which is the very bottom crosshatch from southwest to northeast, and then the operation and maintenance, which is crosshatched from southeast to northwest, and then you've got the fixed charges, which is the shaded or the dark, the gray bar chart. And again, you can see that you can kind of give you a feel of the relative magnitude of each one of these components in terms of how much does it take to produce a kilogram of liquefied hydrogen. Now, don't necessarily look at the actual dollar value, because this dollar value, of course, the dollar of today is not the same as the dollar of 10, 15, 20 years ago, but the relative cost should remain the same. Now, if you look at the next figure here, which is showing on the top left corner of this slide, it's showing this for for the large scale liquefier, whereas the previous two were showing it for the intermediate scale liquefier and for the small scale liquefier. Now, if you go to the larger scale liquefier, you will see that it becomes more attractive to operate at the larger scale. We also did look into the different components as to how much each component of the liquefier contribute to the cost of the liquefaction process. So the most significant component in a liquefaction system is, in fact, the compressor and the heat exchanger. These are the two most significant pieces of components, or pieces of equipment, if you like. And you will see that the cost of the compressor, the cost of liquefaction that is attributed to the cost of operating this compressor, and the cost of liquefaction that's attributed to the operation of the cost of the heat exchanger are, in fact, the line, they take the lion's share. Now, the other two are the refrigeration cost and the reservoir cost. So if you're wondering what the RES is or what the REF is, it's what the reservoir and the refrigeration. Now, again, we're doing it for the three different things. So you will see that the top right corner and the two bottom ones are the same thing, but for the small scale liquefier, the intermediate scale liquefier, and the large optimized liquefier. Now, this is a summary slide where we take all of these costs into account and we look at how much money does it cost to produce a kilogram of liquefied hydrogen for the three different systems that we have identified. And you will see that the large scale liquefier, of course, has the lowest curve and the lowest cost. So in summary, what we found is that the electric or the energy cost per kilogram of liquefied hydrogen does depend on the liquefier efficiency, but is less dependent on the production rate. Okay, it depends on the production rate, but not as much as it does on the liquefier efficiency. The increase in efficiency and the production rate, they cause the operation and maintenance costs to decrease, relatively speaking. The fixed charges on capital investment do depend on the system being utilized, whether it's a Claude system or a Lindy-Hampson system or a Brayton cycle type system. But what you will see is that the cost becomes, the fixed charges on capital investment cost becomes lower at higher production rates. And the lower, the power cost remains pretty constant regardless of the production rate, whereas the operation and maintenance cost is found to decrease as the production rate increases. And the fixed charges on capital investment do decrease as the production rate increase. The operation and maintenance cost is the numerically smaller, the smaller of all the three costs. Further observations are associated with the compressors and the heat exchangers. We found that the compressors and the heat exchangers, of course, include the intercoolers and the aftercoolers and all of those. Those are all heat exchange devices. These are the most important in a liquefaction plant. And in a simple conceptual plant, we found that the compressor cost is the highest, while in the intermediate size plant, it has the heat exchanger cost was the highest. And the optimized large scale plant had the highest intercooler cost. So that was an interesting observation on our part. The compressor installed cost is highest for a conceptual plant and is lowest for an optimized large scale plant. And the heat exchanger installed cost is highest for the intermediate size plant and is lowest for the optimized large scale plant. Now, in summary, the cost of liquid hydrogen is lowest for the optimized large scale plant and is highest for the smaller plant. And we, based on that study, we found that if you increase the production rate to 30,000 kilogram per hour at a cost of electricity of 4 cents per kilowatt hour, which is very low now, you will actually be able to produce liquefied hydrogen at 63 cents per kilogram. Now, the next topic would be hydrogen storage, which is really the second big topic in this presentation today. But first of all, I would like to share with you, this is a slide from a reference in Energies in 2021 by M. Aziz, and he summarized in that slide all the different modes of storage. He called physical storage versus chemical storage. In the physical storage, he talks about compressed hydrogen, liquefied hydrogen, cryocompressed hydrogen. I'm going to talk about that a little later in the presentation. The cryocompressed hydrogen is essentially compressed liquid. In other words, you have a liquid hydrogen under pressure, and the slush hydrogen, which is a combination of liquid and solid at the triple point. Then, of course, the metal hydrides. There are metal hydrides, there are complex hydrides, chemical hydrides, and interstitial metal hydrides. These are all different versions of the metal hydride category, or the hydrides category. And then under chemical storage, there is, of course, the adsorption and the liquid organic carriers and the reformed organic fuels and the hydrolysis. All of those are different possibilities. All of that, of course, is outside the scope of what we have today. We're going to focus only on the liquid storage. So to go back to a quick comparison of the so-called storage types and densities, the densities here are going to be both gravimetric and volumetric. The gravimetric is going to be per kilogram, and the volumetric is going to be per meter cube. So if you look, for example, in the large volume storage, which would be somewhere between 100 meter cube to 10,000 meter cube of storage, there's underground storage. Essentially, you can have an underground cavern where you store hydrogen, gaseous hydrogen, in that underground place. You could have somewhere between 5 and 10 kilogram of hydrogen per meter cube of storage. If you go to the pressurized gas storage, which is above ground, the gravimetric density is not good. The volumetric density is not great. You can see that it's between 2 and 16. The gravimetric density, of course, is not very good. The metal hydride storage, the gravimetric density is not very good, but the volumetric density is very nice, 50 to 55. And of course, liquid hydrogen is the liquid hydrogen is a gold standard as far as the volumetric density, and as far as the gravimetric density as well. Liquid hydrogen is 1 kilogram per 1 kilogram, 1 kilogram of hydrogen per 1 kilogram of storage, and 65 to 69 kilogram of hydrogen per meter cube of storage. If you go to the stationary small storage, which is under 100 meter cube, you're looking at pressurized gas cylinders. These are mostly in domestic or commercial applications. The volumetric density is about 15. Gravimetric density is not great. Metal hydrides have a nice volumetric density, 50 to 53. Liquid hydrogen, of course, is the gold standard, 65. And then for vehicles, those are going to be between 0.1 and 0.5 meter cube. You don't want to have a lot of hydrogen stored on your vehicle because it will make the vehicle more or heavier in this case, and it will affect the gas mileage, so to speak. You could have pressurized gas cylinders. It gives you 15 kilogram of hydrogen per meter cube. You can have metal hydride. You could have the liquid hydrogen, of course, more or less the same, not as attractive as a large volume storage, of course, because the system is a smaller one. Now, what are the challenges in liquid hydrogen storage? Well, many challenges, but let us just pick the most obvious ones. The so-called orthopara conversion, which is an exothermic reaction that is going to release heat, and it's going to cause the liquid hydrogen to vaporize or become gaseous hydrogen. Of course, heat leak, which is the heat transfer from the outside to the inside of the door, or the inside of the storage vessel, or inside of the tank. Now, thermal stratification is essentially when you have a tank of liquid hydrogen, and what happens is the liquid hydrogen stratifies in such a way that the warmer liquid hydrogen will go up, and the cooler liquid hydrogen will go down in the bottom of the tank. So that if you measure the temperature in the tank at the higher elevations of the tank, or the higher layers of the tank, you'll see that the temperature is significantly larger than the temperature at the lower elevations. And what happens because of the heat leak from the side walls of the tank, what you're going to find is that the stratified layer will also be covering in the vicinity of the inside walls of the door, that there will be a warmer layer in the vicinity of the walls, and it will make the convection currents are going to be such that when the warmer liquid hydrogen goes up, the density of liquid hydrogen goes down, and as a consequence, because the density is lower, it will start moving downward. As it moves downward, it gets cooled by physically touching the lower layers of the colder hydrogen. And as it gets cooled, the density goes up again. And as the density goes up, as the density goes up, it will continue to fall. And as it touches the side walls and all that, then it warms up again, and it will go up because of the lower density, and the cycle continues. You will have convection currents inside the tank as a result of this stratification. Now, as the stratification is not good news because of a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that you don't have a homogeneously uniform temperature distribution inside that tank. Now, self-pressurization happens when the liquid hydrogen becomes gas, and it builds the pressure up. When it builds the pressure up, because the gas collects, the liquid converts into gas, and as the gas collects on the top of the surface of the liquid, what you're going to find is that the pressure will build up, and that pressure eventually, some of the hydrogen will leak out because of the higher pressure inside, because the flow goes from the higher pressure to the lower pressure. But on the positive side, that buildup of gas actually helps slow down the vaporization, or the transformation from liquid to vapor. Because as the pressure builds up on the surface, on the free surface, it makes it harder for the liquid molecules to become gaseous molecules. So, but that effect is a side effect. It's a minor effect, and it cannot compete with the effect of the actual vaporization, which is at a much higher level. It's a bigger effect than the other effect that I just talked about with the increased pressure. Now, sloshing is a process whereby when you have a tanker, let us say, of liquid hydrogen, a tanker having liquid hydrogen in, and that tanker is moving on the road, and then it stops at the traffic lights. Every time the tanker stops at the traffic lights and then starts to move again, what you're going to find is that the liquid is going to be going back and forth inside the tanker. And as it does that, the kinetic energy is going to, when it hits the walls, it's going to convert into thermal energy. Okay, thermal energy is bad news, because thermal energy means that you're essentially going to vaporize the hydrogen or boil off the hydrogen. So this is not a huge thing, but it is a problem, especially in small tankers, when you don't have a whole lot of volume, that you can't afford to lose a lot of liquid hydrogen because of that, because the tanker can only take so much. If you have a large volume, you can afford to lose a little bit of liquid, but not if you have a smaller, the typical tankers that we see on the road. And flashing is a phenomenon that takes place when you actually transfer liquid hydrogen from a reservoir to another reservoir. For example, if you're at the production plant, let's say the liquefaction plant, you're going to transfer that liquid from the plant into a tanker. Now, that tanker could be a big tanker, could be a small tanker. Now, you could transfer that into larger storage doors. Okay, but if you transfer them to the tankers are normally smaller in size than the larger doors that exist to store that in a stationary mode. So what happens is, in order for the liquid to transfer from the source reservoir to the sink tank, or the source tank to the sink tank, you're going to have the pressure higher at the source and lower at the sink, which means that when the liquid goes from the higher pressure reservoir to the lower pressure tank, there will be some flashing, meaning that some of the liquid will in fact flash into gas or into vapor in this case. All right. So that's essentially what the flashing is. It's a necessary evil. There is very little we can do about it. We can try to minimize it as much as possible by using a pump, and I will show you some of the work that Argonne National Lab has done to see if using a pump will actually make things a little faster, and therefore less losses, less boil off losses as a consequence. Here I'm just making some common sense observations. Since liquid hydrogen is typically stored at temperatures very close to its boiling point, which is 20.3 Kelvin, 253 degrees below 0 Celsius, even a small amount of heat addition would be sufficient to vaporize the hydrate, the cryogen, in this case the liquid hydrogen. The boil-off losses associated with the storage of liquid can consume a significant portion of the available combustion energy. Some people guesstimated that to be about 30% of the available combustion energy. Fact that, and I'm talking about 30% as far as the liquefaction cost, or the liquefaction energy that's used could be as high as 30%. Factors that contribute to those losses include orthopara conversion, of course, heat leak, thermal stratification, self-pressurization, sloshing, and flashing, as I just discussed with you. Of course, the heat influx into the tank is going to cause the boil off, and that can come from cables, from pipes, from outing, and there will be convection losses, there will be radiation losses, in this case gains, that is, in other words, there would be the heat coming from the outside to the inside. The low pressure change, the low phase change enthalpy of hydrogen for liquid to gas is about 540 kilojoules per kilogram. Okay, that's the phase change enthalpy, the so-called enthalpy change, or the latent heat associated with the phase change. There are limitations. These limitations can be partially overcome by using cylindrical storage doors, and here the idea is to have the aspect ratio as small as possible. You don't want to use tanks with large aspect ratios. Those are not good for, they increase the heat transfer and as a consequence increase the boil off. The storage tanks with complicated structures and high aspect ratios are not suitable. If you have large tanks with optimum aspect ratios, they could work reasonably well for you. Now, there's also the so-called radiation shields. You could have multiple layers of radiation shields, like 40 layers of radiation shields that can provide super insulation to the hydrogen tank. Also, you can use cooling down losses. There are cooling down losses that may occur during the refilling of the cylinder, because the storage vessel has to be cooled to minus 253 degrees Celsius. The unwanted losses due to the complex hydrogen storage structure, as well as the complex structure of the storage vessel, make liquid hydrogen storage more expensive and complicated for transportation applications. And like I said, it's been theorized that 30% of the net calorific value of hydrogen can be eaten up in the liquefaction and the reliquefaction process. Now, here, I'm going to go to the last part of the study here of the presentation, and I'm going to show you some slides from this presentation that was made by these three researchers from Argonne National Lab. They actually made that presentation earlier in 2024 at the Hydrogen Infrastructure workshop, which is organized by the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office. And I'm going to give you the very small highlights of that study. Basically, what they did was they looked at the vehicular storage of liquid hydrogen, meaning that in cars and trucks, but predominantly in heavy-duty vehicles, large tankers. And what they did, basically, they looked at these three different possibilities. You can either load liquid hydrogen from the liquefier, the liquefaction plant, into a trailer, which is the top figure on the left side, or you could do a transfer of liquid hydrogen from a trailer to a tank, which is in the one in the middle of the page, or you could transfer liquid hydrogen from the tank to the trailer or to the truck. In this case, it would be the bottom left. And the different scenarios that they used, one of them involved a very large loading process that would apply to the top figure, which is about 64,350 liters of hydrogen, liquefied hydrogen, coming from the plant into the trailer. And here they used a transfer rate of 600 kilogram per hour of liquefied hydrogen, and the pressure transfer from the terminal at 24 psi absolute to the trailer at 20 to 22 psi absolute. As I told you, there's always the pressure from the source is higher than the pressure to the sink. So the source tank has always got a higher pressure, 24, and of course the sink tank is going to be the 22 to 20 psi, and of course that is going to cause the losses that I told you about associated with the transfer. Now, if you go to the next scenario, which is the doer that you're dealing with, is you are loading 12,500 liters of liquefied hydrogen at, let us say, a refueling station. In this case, the scale is much smaller, and the pressure will have to be higher. You're now, the source is 60 psi, and the sink is 45 psi, and your transfer rate is about 1,100 kilogram per hour of liquefied hydrogen. Now here you're going to see that the losses, the boil-off losses, are significantly higher. 16% total boil-off losses versus 3.3% total boil-off losses compared to the first case. Now 3% of that is coming from doer during the loading, and 12% are coming from the final the so-called depressurization of the trailer, which is going to have to go all the way down to 20 psi. Now, the pump, if you use a pump to transfer, that can greatly reduce the hydrogen loss rate. And if you do it from the doer, you're looking at 3.4%, and from the trailer, it's about 0%. All right, so that's essentially what they did. Now, they also looked at four different possibilities here. They call them. Two of them are in the liquid hydrogen scenario. There's the liquid hydrogen, that's LH2, and then there's a so-called subcooled liquid hydrogen, which is SLH2. Okay, the subcooled liquid hydrogen, where the temperature is below the saturation temperature at the prevailing pressure. Now here they also looked at the LH2, which is the transfer without a pump, without onboard pump versus with an onboard pump. So the LH2-1 is using the pump to speed up things, and for the LH2 is not using a pump. But then the third scenario would be the subcooled liquid hydrogen transfer, and then the fourth one is going to be the so-called cryo-compressed hydrogen. The cryo-compressed hydrogen is essentially liquid hydrogen under pressure. And if you look at the different cases, they looked at what applies to each case in terms of for example, the onboard pump is yes here and no for LH2, no for the cryo compressed hydrogen, and no for the subcooled liquid hydrogen. You have an in-tank heat exchanger. You have the allowable heat gain is given the values here for the different cases, the minimum dormancy given here for different cases, the operating pressure given here for different cases. And these are all actually published in the, and three of them are in the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy. If you look at the bottom of the slide, you will see that there is a paper in 2023, the volume 48, and then another paper in 2023, volume 48. Those are the first two papers there. And then the third paper is in volume 43, and that's in 2018. All of those are essentially having the more details about that particular study. And then they have, of course, the final line, which it's giving you the reference regarding the subcooled liquid hydrogen. Now, just on the summary of results real quick, what they did was they showed the storage volume, comparing all these cases. Of course, in this case, you're looking at 6 different scenarios. You got the liquid hydrogen 1 and the liquid hydrogen 2, and then you've got the compressed hydrogen, and then you've got the subcooled liquid hydrogen, and then you got the cryocompressed hydrogen, and then you have the compressed hydrogen. All of those, the 6 different scenarios, and it's showing you which one is more attractive as far as the storage volume. Here they concluded that the storage volume was the pump has the largest available internal volume for hydrogen storage. Okay, so that is the first result there. If you go to the next slide, you will see that the cryocompressed hydrogen has the highest hydrogen storage density, what they call usable hydrogen storage density. Storage density, of course, is in this case it's going to be given in terms of kilogram per meter cube. So you can see that you're looking at 65.5 for the cryocompressed versus 23.2 for the compressed hydrogen at 350 bar. There's compressed hydrogen at 350 and compressed hydrogen 700. Of course, the 700 is better than the 350, but the cryocompressed is even better, not surprisingly, because it combines the benefits of the liquid and the compressed hydrogen. Of course, you're talking about, I believe, 35 atmosphere for the cryocompressed. All right, and again, that's a comparison as far as the storage density. Now, the next one is the so-called gravimetric density, and of course, the gravimetric density has units of kilogram per kilogram, kilogram of hydrogen per kilogram of the system. In this case, they found that the option of using a pump, liquid hydrogen was a pump, has the highest gravimetric capacity in this particular case. This tank has these numbers there. Then if you go to the volumetric capacity, you'll see that the cryo-compressed hydrogen has the highest volumetric capacity. Again, not surprisingly, that is 42.5 gram of hydrogen per liter. Okay. And it compares favorably, it outperforms all of the other options, the other 5 options there. And then if you look at the cost, and that study concluded was the cost, you will see that the subcooled liquid hydrogen is in fact the lowest option, the lowest cost option, if you're doing heavy duty applications similar to the one that they were describing there. So as you can see, the results are a little mixed. I mean, you're looking at some systems have more volume, internal volume than others. Some others have more density than others. Some others have less cost than others. So you're going to have to actually walk your way very carefully here, because it's the option is not exactly, or the best option is not exactly obvious. Their future outlook, they said that that the cryocompressed hydrogen and the subcooled liquid hydrogen seem to be attractive. They seem to stand above, head and shoulders above the other different choices for the heavy duty trucks. Now they say if the fuel cell system accepts hydrogen delivered at 5 bars. Now the second observation they made was that the cryocompressed hydrogen is the only viable liquid storage option if the fuel cell system requires hydrogen to be delivered at 15 bars, which is some of these fuel cells require higher pressure in order to operate. Okay, so in that case, if your vehicle requires a 15 bar minimum to operate the fuel cell, then you're looking at the cryocompressed hydrogen being your best option. The low pressure liquid hydrogen storage becomes competitive if onboard boost pumps capable of delivering 16 kilogram per hour of hydrogen at 5 to 15 bars become available. And then stationary pumps capable of transferring liquid hydrogen from the trailer truck at 1100 kilogram per hour and providing 5 bars of pressure can greatly reduce the hydrogen loss during the door loading. And last but not least, the future study is needed to assess the potential of eliminating hydrogen loss from the door with a cryocooler. Okay, this is the results of the Argonne National Lab that was presented in February in 2024. And I wanted to share that with you. This is one of many, many, many studies that are being done. And I just wanted to give you a flavor of what the research that is funded by the Department of Energy is looking like. Just to give you a flavor that there's a lot of effort and a lot of energy and a lot of money involved in pushing forward these different scenarios. Now, just to continue this line of thinking, may I remind everyone that on June 7, 2021, the Secretary of Energy launched the so-called Hydrogen Energy Earthshot to accelerate breakthroughs towards a net zero economy. And the goal here is very simple. They want to bring down the cost of producing hydrogen to $1 per 1 kilogram in 1 decade, meaning by the end of this decade, they want to bring down the cost of producing hydrogen by 80%, because right now it's costing about $5 per kilogram. The hydrogen shot basically established a framework and a foundation for clean hydrogen deployment. Industries are actually beginning to implement some of the clean hydrogen to reduce emissions. And currently, hydrogen from renewable energy costs about $5 per kilogram. If we go to the 80% reduction and reduce it to $1 per kilogram, we may, in fact, have achieved a big milestone in terms of pushing us towards the so-called hydrogen economy. And of course, the beneficiary here is that there will be more clean energy jobs. We will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The position of the United States is going to be more competitive in the clean energy market on a global scale. So with this, I would like to end my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sherif, for this very, very interesting presentation. I think we all just got a PhD in hydrogen. Now, it's your turn, folks. If you have any questions for Dr. Sherif, type them into the Q&A box or to the comment box or send a direct message. We will return after a short break. Welcome back. Let's dive straight into your questions since we are pretty short on time. The first question is, beyond transportation applications, what are some promising emerging uses for liquid hydrogen?
Yeah, thank you very much for this great question. Of course, hydrogen is has its uses in space applications. It has actually been the preferred fuel for the space shuttle program during the time of the space shuttle, and it continues to be very attractive because of the fact that it can give you sustainability in space. You know, where you have the longevity, and you could slush hydrogen is a good example where you could have a very large concentration of hydrogen in a slush mode, where the volumetric density is very high, and you got a lot of energy per unit volume. And so it has applications in the National Aerospace Plane. Back in the days when we had the National Aerospace Plane, it can be used for that. It can be used in the airline industry. I mean, eventually it can be used in the airline aviation sector. Of course, many of you may or may not know that the contribution to greenhouse gases from the aviation sector is not insignificant at all. It is very, very large. And if we can cut down on that emission, uh, we will have made big achievements and towards the net zero carbon emissions.
Thank you. And another question, and the last one. Can you discuss the economic feasibility of a large-scale liquid hydrogen production compared to other clean energy options?
Um, I don't have the numbers for the other clean energy options off the top of my head, so the comparison that I can present would be qualitative in nature and not quantitative in nature. I would say, as a general rule, that we continue to make headways in making hydrogen coupled with solar energy as a primary energy source more attractive, more cost competitive, and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can see where we will get to a point where it will become cheaper to use solar energy as a primary energy source, produce hydrogen, use hydrogen either uh, as a liquid hydrogen or gaseous hydrogen in the transportation sector, or if you could pipeline the hydrogen gas to the different residential units and different industrial units. I can see where also you could put fuel cells in cars and trucks and operate those fuel cells with hydrogen and oxygen, uniting essentially through a reverse electrolysis process that produces electricity and water vapor. So I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I don't know that as we speak that we are exceeding the other renewable energy sources, but I can tell you that we are making headways towards exceeding them and outperforming them.
A big thank you to you, Dr. Sherif, for tackling these questions in your presentation. And thanks to all of you for your fantastic questions and for watching us. You made this session a real hit. Before signing off, please subscribe to our channels for more mind-expanding content on hydrogen. Follow Energy News Biz to stay ahead of the curve with the latest news and insights. And if you need a boost in your marketing game, check out iMarketing PR and Hydrogen Energy News Biz marketing services. We've got the expertise to help you shine in the hydrogen world. And remember, you know you're in serious field when the easiest part of your job is making hydrogen cool down to minus 253 degrees Celsius. That's it for today's webinar. Stay curious, stay inspired, and most importantly, stay sustainable. Until the next